behind you, right behind you. You also have translation. Remember, some Q&A might be in
Translation?
translation.
If it's, yes. Good afternoon, everybody. It's not responsive. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
There we go. Hello, Alan. Everybody's here. My name is Bill Rudnick, and I am delighted to be here. I am a member of the board of directors of the Global Food Banking Network, and a long, long time ago, I was one of the people who helped found this organization. And so today, to be able to see this event, to see it in London, to see the energy, to see the passion, and to see the future are gifts for me. We are here today to talk about public policy and the impact of public policy on hunger in general and food banking in particular. One of the things that we have all figured out over the years is that it takes three groups to feed a community, to feed a country, and to feed a world. Those three groups are government, the private sector, and the not-for-profit sector. And no matter what we try and do, all of those three groups always end up at the table. Government plays a very important role, both in terms of the food that it provides, but also in terms of the public policy that it creates that supports, or in some cases inhibits, the feeding of hungry people. To help us understand how public policy impacts hunger and hunger relief, we have an amazing panel. I am not going to go through their bios because we're short on time today. I guess lunch started late, and so we got cut short. But I would like to quickly introduce who is on the stage with me. To my left is Emily Leib, who is an assistant clinical professor of law at Harvard Law School. To her left is Nadia Tavares-Goodman, PhD, who is an international consultant with the World Food Program. To her left is Angela Frigo, who's the Secretary General of FBLI, which I love to say in the French. To Angela's left is Joseph Gitler, founder and chairman of Leket, Israel. And finally, Nichol, who is the founder of the Food Bank Singapore. Welcome to all of our panelists today. We're going to start with a question for Emily. Harvard Law's Food Law and Policy Clinic has important and relevant experience in assessing food donation policies. Can you give us a little bit of background and perspective on how government policies can affect the ability of food banks to secure food resources, and how those policies can assist in promoting donations, and in some cases create an impediment to doing so?
Sure. Well, first, I'm really glad to be here. I arrived this morning, and so I'm sorry I haven't met everyone yet. I'm hoping to meet all of you. As you heard, I direct a program called the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School, and what the clinic is an action-oriented research program that really covers a range of the laws that impact food. And a big portion of our work the last few years, really the last 8 or 9 years, has been on food waste and food donation. So we work on other issues as well, but that's become really big. And just want to start with the reason that I know this to be so important, the way that laws impact food waste and food donation, is because in our experience, we now are getting hundreds of calls and emails from organizations throughout the US and now in other parts of the world as well, asking questions about the laws and saying, we have this food, we want to get it donated, or I'm an organization and I'd like people to donate food to me, and you're a lawyer and we know, can you help us understand this law? No one will answer these questions we have. So just the scale and the number of requests that we get really show it's not just me sitting there saying, I'm a lawyer, so everything is about law. We actually are getting a lot of requests and hearing about this and learning a lot from on-the-ground issues. So I kind of want to highlight a couple of areas of law that we've worked on and we've seen primarily at this point in the US, but that as we're starting to get into looking at these issues globally, we're seeing these same issues emerge in other countries. One is the issue of date labeling, which is something kind of where we got started in this work in 2011, and in 2013 released a report on the issues in the US because of the lack of standard date labels. So I know you heard earlier from Carrie at Walmart Foundation. Walmart had done a study and found that there were 47 different date labels on products. So in some cases, this is an issue because there's not laws that require standard labels telling you which products are labeled for a quality reason versus for a safety reason, which is true in the US. So people, whether it's stores and potential donors not knowing what the label means and whether the food can be donated, whether it's food bank staff or volunteers more often who aren't familiar, or recipients and consumers saying, I don't know if this is safe. And then even we've seen in other countries that have standardized the label language between the two, if there's not clarity on the fact that food can be donated after that quality date, when there's a quality date, then a lot of that gets wasted. So that's one area. Another big one is on tax, which has been interesting for us to see that tax can both, as you mentioned, serve is one of those areas that can serve either as an impediment or as an incentive. In terms of an impediment, in countries that have a VAT tax, we've seen, throughout Europe, for example, that there's sometimes challenges if you have to pay a tax when you donate food and not pay one when you throw it away. It doesn't make business sense to donate it if you're paying more money to do that. So that's a place where tax can be an impediment. On the flip side, it can be an incentive, and we've seen, there's a cost to donating food, as I'm sure everyone here knows, that there's the cost to businesses of transporting it and storing the food and training workers to kind of make sure that they are sorting food that can be donated. And tax can serve as one example of something that could serve as an incentive. And we've seen in the US and a lot of other countries now development of tax deductions and tax credits that would go to businesses to say, we want you to do this. There's a social good to donating this food, and here's a way to get that money. Similarly, things like grants or subsidies or loans that could go out and provide some of the infrastructure needed for that. Just want to mention two others, and then we'll maybe get to circle back to some of these. Liability protection. In the U.S. we have Good Samaritan protection, which is very strong, and still even in the U.S. we've seen a lot of businesses saying that concerns over potential liability or responsibility, could be a barrier. So I think both having clear laws on that and also awareness and helping businesses manage that. And then just the last one that I think we're seeing in the U.S. and also in other countries are either diversion requirements or donation requirements for food, which operate in a really different way in terms of saying when you have extra food, you will have to donate that or do something with it and not send it to a landfill. So in Massachusetts, where I live, we have now a requirement that food businesses are not able to send over a certain amount of food to the landfill. And they don't have to donate it, but in Massachusetts we've seen a 22% increase in donations as a result of that. And it's also brought money into the state as well. They've shown that it's created jobs and brought in money to the GDP. So just, we firsthand are seeing the development of all of these policies. We're answering a lot of questions on them, and I think it's an exciting, time to be thinking about these ways that we can break down some of these barriers.
Great, thank you. Nadia, one of the great efforts to address hunger in a community has been Brazil's Zero Hunger effort. And obviously, that's something that brought together a lot of different constituencies to work together to pursue that goal. Can you tell us, give us some perspective on that?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. On behalf of the director of the WFP Center of Excellence Against Hunger, Mr. Daniel Balaban, I'm happy to be here representing him. So I work as international consultant for the Center of Excellence Against Hunger. We are based in Brazil. The center was created in 2011. It's a partnership between the WFP and the Brazilian government. We we have been working with South-South cooperation. So we have been, because of the success of the Zero Hunger, which was initiated in 2003, many countries has kind of developed interested to learn how Brazil managed to kind of achieve I have some data here actually, to achieve the end of hunger. So in Brazil reduced from 1990 to 2012, we had 25.5% to 3.5%, the percentage of population is extreme hunger. So this is quite a big achievement, and countries wanted to learn about it. So the center was developed to do that. We don't work in Brazil, but we export the Brazilian knowledge on the programs. But now we also work with other countries because, as you may know, other countries has also developed and working on their kind of programs, kind of food security, school feeding, or social protection. So to give an idea about the Zero Hunger was a strategy developed in 2003 in order to, and brought together the different sectors of the society. So we have the civil society, we have the government leading, and then we had the civil society with the Food Security Council, which is CONSEA, and then we have other kind of stakeholders part of the process. Brazil, as you know, is a 3 layers governance: federal, state, and municipal. So it's very important that those kind of government layers also work together. So within the Zero Hunger strategy, several policies were developed and became even a law. So the right to food was the created part of was a law in 2010. So one of the axes, I'm going to concentrate on the access to food. So the axis of the Zero Hunger we have 4 axes. But one is access to food, where we have several programs. We have the cash transfer, which is the Bolsa Família, part of it. We have the National School Feeding Program. Brazil has the second largest national school feeding program. Was created in 1947, and it's provided meals for at least all the children, primary, secondary children in the state's school. Also, we have some instruments to provide, to support the end of hunger, which one of them is food banks. So within the same kind of policy, food banks is seen as one of the instruments. So the food banks also is part of the Zero Hunger strategy, can be implemented at municipal level, implemented by the municipality through the SEASAs. SEASAs are the food distributes which all the municipalities have one, and but it can be also have the private partnership. So it can be implemented by government, but also by the private sector through the NGO. So just to give you some example, I would like to share about the case of Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte is a city in the state of Minas Gerais, where they have 6 food banks, 5 linked to the municipality, which is part of the food supply center that I mentioned, the SEASAs. And they received some subsidy from the federal government to implement and modernize. But if municipality also has to put some counterpart, so they also contribute to it. But it's just always thinking that there is a policy in place in order to support this implementation. So those food banks, normally they have a kind of a management structure, yeah, within each of the municipalities in order to support the implementation. So in another example would be from food banks implemented by NGO. Where, for example, in the case of São Paulo, there is one NGO who works with collect excess of food from companies and business in order to distribute to social institutions. So I don't know if, yeah, I'm open for questions later.
We'll get to questions at the end. Thank you very much, Nadia. Angela, FEBA deals with both national governments and the European Union. I imagine that's a complicated series of relationships to navigate. Am I right in my guess?
Especially at European level, I would say. Hot days. So, yeah, first of all, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel this afternoon. The European Food Banks Federation, or FEBA, as you said, represents 388 food banks in 28 European countries. So most of these countries are EU member states, but we have also some European countries, let's say from a geographical point of view, like Albania, North Macedonia, Norway, Serbia, Switzerland, and Ukraine. And so, as you said, it's quite a complicated issue at European level, but also at national level. So, as regards the interaction with governments, our organization closely collaborates with the European institutions. Especially, we work a lot with the European Commission, with DG Employment, which is in charge of social affairs, and also with DG Health and Food Safety, which is responsible to fight food waste. And we work also with national governments, in particular through our members, in collaboration with our members. And indeed, one of the main activities of FEBA consists in representing its membership at European level in order to advocate and lobby to promote and facilitate food donation in the different countries. And in order to better fulfill this activity, last year, our board of directors decided to move the organization from Paris to Brussels and to reorganize the structure of the organization. And so among the innovations that were implemented over the last year, the board of directors decided to create a new EU working group, which is a working group coordinated by FEBA, but it's composed of representatives from all our members, and it's representatives who are dealing with European issues. And so the main aim of this working group consists in developing thematic expertise on EU topics, and also to facilitate the exchange of information and best practices between FEBA and our membership and vice versa. And so just to give you a very concrete example about how we are working with European institutions, but also with national governments, last May we had our annual convention in Budapest. And so we officially launched this EU working group, and we asked all our members to nominate one person to become a permanent member of this working group, and if it's possible, also a substitute. And so at the moment we have, this working group is made of 22 people from 15 different countries. And I would say that we can summarize the fil rouge of this EU working group as sharing. We are sharing information and best practices. We have a regular dialogue from the European level to the national level and vice versa. And we work together to build common positions in order to improve public policies. So as first action, we prepare and then share with our working group a roadmap as regards the policies that are affecting the activity of food banks for the next programming period, so 2021-2027, because the European programming is based on 7 years. And in particular, we are focusing on the European Social Fund Plus, which is a new fund that will be implemented as from 2021, dealing with food and material assistance. We are also dealing with the Common Agricultural Policy at European level, and also with the Circular Economy Action Plan, because it has some specific provisions regarding food waste and food donation. So one of the first activities that we organized with our EU working group was to have a workshop in Brussels on the European social strategy. And so we have this 2 days workshop with 23 participants from 13 different countries of our members. And the workshop had some objectives, such as the promotion of an operational cohesion among FEBA members, because it was the first activity for this working group. So it was very important also to, let's say, to create a very good and positive environment. And we had also some activities of team building in order to increase the relationship between the participants. But we also had the possibility to increase the knowledge of the participants on the role of the different European institutions, because, well, the European Union is quite complex, and also to explain the decision-making process and what are the European social policies that can have an impact on food banks at European level. And we also updated our members on the ongoing work concerning the European Social Fund Plus, with a specific focus on food aid and material assistance.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
can you wrap up, because we've got a lot?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
And so then I would say that the best follow-up of this work was that at the end of the workshop, we drafted together with our members a position paper on the European Social Fund Plus. We submitted the position paper to the European Parliament. We also proposed some amendments to the proposal of the European Commission, and some of our amendments were then approved. So, for example, the Parliament decided to increase the budget of, as regards food aid and material assistance from 2% to 3%, and also the role of civil society has increased. And so it's a very, I would say, simple and concrete example of how we are working with our members, with the European institutions and the governments. Well, the work has not finished because, Brexit is still ongoing. We will have the European elections in May, and so there will be many different decisions that still have to be taken at European level. And so probably next year we will have the possibility to give you an update on the work.
Great, and maybe next year you can give us an update on Brexit too. That would be. Thank you. Joseph, I know that liability protection has been an issue for a long time in Israel. It sounds like there's been some progress made recently.
Yes, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I was actually very surprised the other day when I was on a different panel before the conference began with our CEO of the Global Food Bank, Lisa Moon, who said that only 7 countries in the world, if I got my numbers right, have a Good Samaritan Law, which protects food donors from legal liability so long as they're not reckless. Perhaps if I had known that beforehand, I wouldn't have always been surprised by how long it took us to get this law passed. I always thought it was typical dysfunctional Israeli politics, but instead it was just typical for the world that it's so hard to get these types of laws passed. I think interestingly in our case for Leket, we've actually been quite successful since our founding 15 years ago in getting donations of what I'll call the more risky food. Primarily I'm focused on excess cooked food left in hotels and corporate cafeterias and event halls. It was actually quite rare for us to get pushback like I would have expected as 2 American lawyers sitting on the stage, that litigation liability fear. And actually that was not the case. Most of the responses we got were, we know there's all this food going to waste. When can you pick it up and distribute it to agencies who feed the poor? But what happened is that as the years went by, we started to see as Israel's become more westernized and more Western companies started to move in, that the bigger multinationals were giving us a harder time without those protections. So about 10 years ago, a former GFN board member, Sherry Fox, who's also on the board of Leket Israel, together with something called the Forum for Food and Security in Israel, started to work with us to get a law passed, a Good Samaritan Law, which would offer protections to food companies so they would be confident in giving us food. We were not successful at the time, and we actually gave up after a couple of years. What we learned and how we were successful today is really what I'd like to talk about over the next couple of minutes. First off, what we learned from our first attempt was that you, have to be ready to invest time in marketing and being known as a known entity. So if you want to get a law passed in your own jurisdictions from other food banks that are sitting here, until you're a really known entity at the governmental level, I wouldn't start. You have to be known by the population. You have to be known by the government. So we decided to really make a conscious decision in Israel to spend time and money, staff time, getting to know members of the Knesset, of our parliament, spending money on advertising, spending money on marketing, and really getting the message out there to the general public that Leket was struggling to get donations of food from certain companies, and if we didn't get this law passed, perfectly good food that could feed the poor would not make it. So we hired a lobbying firm. We started to spend more time in Jerusalem at the Knesset. Not me so much. I get the credit because I'm the chairman of the organization, so it's great to be at the top, but really it was our team and our staff and our lobbyists, and also getting, one of the first things we did is we tried to find a champion. And we were lucky to find a Knesset member, Uri Maklev, who grew up very, very poor and understood what it was like to get donations of food and to use that for his family's own survival. And this is a Good Samaritan law. It's not controversial, okay? These are not laws. Interesting that they're not controversial for Knesset members, for members of parliament, in any country that you're coming from. They're not controversial from the citizens of the country. Where the difficulties start is actually with government ministries. And that's what really took us a long time. So the first objections were with the health ministry. And when they understood from us very quickly that we were not asking for any health and safety waivers, we would work closely with them. We would work with their restriction in place. They were very quick to come to the party and say, we're for this. But actually for us, the hardest part, and what took us probably 2 years to work on, was with the justice ministry. And what you'll see, to those of you who make the decision that you want to get laws passed in your own country, Good Samaritan laws, so the justice ministry had a number of objections. First off, justice ministries don't like to give blanket governmental inability to sue. They just don't like to say to the general population, you've gotten harmed by the food that was given to you. Sorry, you can't sue because we've put this law in place. So that was the first, and that took us a really, really long time to get through. Interestingly, something that I never expected was the Justice Ministry said a law like this says to the population, the poor are going to get secondhand food. Okay, which is something I never imagined in a million years that would be an objection of theirs. And that was really some of the things. They don't like limiting litigation, they don't like limiting, and they don't like giving broad protections to private businesses. Because if you think about this, the biggest beneficiaries of this are businesses donating their food and then any risk. But it took us a long time. And of course, interestingly, after all our hard work and committees and talking to the bigwigs, what really happened was our CEO, Gitty, had a meeting with a deputy minister in the Justice Ministry, spent about a half an hour really hammering why these things were ridiculous, how food companies want to give us this food, how they're going to be careful with the type of food they're giving us, how the quality of the food that we're distributing is often so much better than most food banks could ever afford. So second-class food is exactly the opposite. I take great pride, as I think all of us do, in giving the highest quality food to our agency partners. So that took us really a half an hour meeting after years and years of trying to convince people. And very quickly that changed things. And so about 6 months ago, we finally got this law passed in the Knesset. It took multiple readings. And it cost us, I would say, over the years, about 1 million shekels. That's about $300,000 in lobbying, in staff time, in marketing, in payoff. No, I'm just kidding. In none of that.
Well, I think that's a good point to transition from Joseph.
And and I'll finish with this. Really, what's happened is since that law was passed, we've had dozens and dozens of Israeli food companies who in the past were hesitant to work with us, who are now getting in touch. And I see it, I hear it. This law has opened up doors in so many ways. So certainly, we're happy to continue the conversation with our food bank partners here. We're happy to talk to you on the phone, in person, but keep it in mind, but you really have to have a game plan. That's the point here. You need a game plan to make it happen. We didn't have a game plan, but now in hindsight, we understand what it took, at least in Israel, and hopefully our experiences will help you as you try to get laws passed in your own countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nichol, as the founder of a food bank in Singapore, obviously a very wealthy country, how do you create the attention around the needs of hunger and the hungry in your country and get government and others to pay attention to that?
I guess, hi everyone. Okay, so I'm the co-founder because my fellow co-founder is here with me. It's the first time in 5 years that we're here together. My brother and I actually founded the food bank in Singapore in 2012. So we are really, really quite young in this. So we're 6 years old actually. And it's interesting that I guess by now, for most of you, if you have watched Crazy Rich Asians, you would know where Singapore is. We are not a part of Japan. We're not a part of China. We're a tiny little island that left Malaysia in 1950. And we're actually we're actually 54 years old as a country. We're actually celebrating our bicentennial. We were only founded 200 years ago as a small fishing village. And so in a short span of 40 over years, we spent the first 40 over years of our development from third world to first world. And if you know Singapore now, we like to be number one in a lot of things. Firstly, we are number one country with the most expensive cars. If you don't know, you need to buy a certificate before you can drive a car in Singapore. And that certificate only lasts for 10 years. And that certificate goes only to the government, okay? So it costs about $100,000, wow. Singapore dollars. So I mean, like, especially to the Americans, it's like, wow, I can buy like 20, 30 cars or something, right? So, but that's going to the government. So we have the most expensive cars. We have one of the top GDPs per capita in the world. We have relatively expensive housing, but 80% of the population lives in government housing. And when you see our government housing, I think you would like to stay in it as well, because it's not the kind of government housing that you think it is. It is beautiful, like a private apartment, okay, with all the facilities that you would envision. And it's all part of transferring squatters and villagers into what it is today as what you see in the movie, right? But last year, we also topped another ranking, which has made our work as a food bank even more difficult because Singapore is now the #1 most food secure country in the entire world. So when I say that, it's actually part of the national, the International Food Index. Okay, you can Google it. We are above Ireland, we are above France, we are above UK, we are #1. For a country that imports 92% of every single thing that we consume, we only grow 8%. So how do we become #1? And as I was deep diving into the figures, I was also very surprised. We are the cheapest country in terms of food affordability. So this is where the ironical part is, right? So on one hand, we have the most expensive cars, but we're also the most price affordable country in terms of for food because of the way we are set up as a country. We're a free port. There's no import taxes on food at all, basically nothing else as much. You can get a hot meal for $2.50. I mean, not at the food courts at Marina Bay Sands, okay? I mean, but somewhere in the neighborhood elsewhere. Okay, so you can live off relatively cheap because there's no import taxes and because of the diversity that the government has put in place to ensure that we have a secured food source from wherever it is. And because of that, a lot of the expats, a lot of the local Singaporeans that have been brought up in our beautiful country, some people don't know that there are people in need. And therefore, back to your question, so why did Nicholas and I decided to start the food bank? It's because our family has been in food distribution for the last 80-odd years, and because we're in the system. So firstly, we see on one side, a lot of food being thrown away. And yet on the other side, we have an increasing amount of food donation requests. So we thought, okay, since we're not the largest company, we're not an MNC, but there must be something that we can do about this problem. And so, if you're asking, what did we do? Now the both of us are a little bit like a mini celebrity lobbyist, so you say. We are the go-to people for the media because we have been most vocal about this problem. In Singapore, if you don't know yet, we like to fine people, okay? So if you don't flush the toilet, you get fined. If you anyhow park your cars, you get fined. If you sleep by the beach for too many nights, you get fined, okay? So it is definitely a fine country. Yeah, we have a T-shirt for that, okay? The T-shirt costs $15 only. So, yes, and so putting all of that together, we also realized that because of how our country has been set up for the last 50-odd years, so you asked me what kind of country Singapore is, right? I mean, you've been hearing like, okay, no chewing gum and stuff like that. That's true. You can chew yourself, but you cannot sell chewing gum in Singapore. Okay. I would say that we are a democratic dictatorship. We have been governed by the same government since independence. And honestly, we don't have good opposition at this moment, so I don't think anything would be changing. But we have also benefited because we had a great government for the last 50-odd years that had corrected a lot of wrongs. We are like a young girl in puberty right now, so we're at this stage where we are evolving into more social aspects of being a country. So being the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, the biggest problem that we actually face is that poverty is hidden. Poverty is a taboo word. If you open up the Straits Times in Singapore, which is our national dailies, you are not supposed to see the word poverty anywhere. Okay, yeah, it's illegal many years ago, but now with social media, they've got no choice but to liberalize the use of that word. And the truth is there's no minimum wage, there is no poverty line, there's no food insecurity index, so that's something that the food bank has started to gather money for. So we're spending $250,000 just to get a food insecurity report out. There's a lack of data, which is causing a lot of blindness. So people don't know what you can't see, if there's no data about it, you would think that there's no problem. But one of the biggest challenges recently is last year, one of the universities actually released a food insecurity number of sorts, and we are looking at close to 50% of the people that's being interviewed face some kind of severe to moderate food insecurity. And this is a very big problem that we are currently facing, because on one hand you've got cheap food, but yet you still have so many people that seemingly cannot feed themselves. So from Food Bank Singapore's perspective, what all of us with our tiny team have been doing is we go out to give talks. 70% of our time is spent giving talks, nagging, and converting people. Our biggest failure, as part of the questions, if I may answer that, is none of the supermarkets are donating any of their excess. None. Zero. And there's no Walmarts in Singapore, okay? So, but anyway, all our national supermarkets, as you call it, nobody's donating anything. So a lot of the donations are from some of the food companies, the importers, but one end of the success that we've done in our very tender 6 years being set up is we do cooked food collection, we do dry food collection, we do fresh food collection. We've got our logistics sorted out pretty much. And I think there's a lot more that we can do. Importantly, hopefully, the Good Samaritan Law, from what we understand, or one of the reporters called me like, hey, I heard that it's going to announce tomorrow that the Good Samaritan Law is going to be announced. And then the reporter called me again the next day, oh, I'm sorry, the parliament decided to withdraw. So maybe for some of the reasons that he has mentioned, I'm not very sure. But we know that for sure, the government is looking at setting up this law because there's a lot of donations and food that can be salvaged from the supply chain. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful success story, both for your organization and obviously for Singapore as well. We have only about 10 minutes left, and we were going to try and do some questions at the end. So I think that if there are questions, we'd love to pivot to that. Do we have microphones? And we have a microphone. Are there any questions?
I'm Claire Nella from RAP. I've heard some anecdotal evidence about the activities of food banks being used as a justification by government to do less on the causes of poverty. I just wondered if you on the panel had come across that, and if you have, what have you said or done about it?
Nadia, I would imagine you have the broadest perspective on this from the WFP point of view. Do you have a thought on this?
Just thinking about, not really. I think in the case, I'm going to share the case of Brazil, is mainly it's part of this strategy, and food bank has been one of the instruments. So it wasn't just the food bank. Within was the food bank, was also part of the strategy, was the communitary restaurants, So it was a series of instruments in order to tackle the hunger. I don't know if I answered your question.
I'll give a perspective on it. It is something that over the years I have certainly heard, and I've heard it in terms of taking food banking being a means to take pressure off government to do what people expect government to do. Two things on that. One is I have found that argument never gets very far because once you have a food bank in a community, people love their food banks. And so you don't find that the pressure goes toward the food banks on that. The second is, as food banking has evolved and focused more on food waste, I think that argument becomes a lot weaker. Because food banks not only are addressing hunger as an issue, but they're also addressing an environmental issue as well, and there's some power to that as well.
I don't know if I can jump in here, but
Please.
Before we started the food bank in 2012, we also assumed that because the Singapore government takes care of every single thing, right? So we thought that this would be something that should be led by the government, but in Singapore there's no Ministry of Food. And so nobody is really looking at this piece in totality. And I think with the society evolving at this moment, we've taken on that role that NGOs also need to play a part in raising certain things or doing certain things and spearheading certain actions. And then maybe subsequently then the government comes in to support. I don't think it's them, not wanting the responsibility of sorts, but I think there's a lot of areas that the NGOs can actually step up and do their part as well. Yeah.
Other questions?
Bueno, en realidad tengo dos preguntas, una para Emily y otra en Spanish. Excuse me.
We could tell.
Ahí lo hice.
First one's for you.
Oh. Tengo dos preguntas, una para Emily y otra para Joseph. La de Emily es, sabiendo que en materia internacional, en materia de derecho internacional, existe relatividad, no obligatoriedad, ¿ves alguna posibilidad de establecer algún tipo de legislación estándar para el tema de alimentos, de regulación de responsabilidad de donantes, etcétera? Y para Joseph, la pregunta directa es, ¿en qué consiste exactamente en Israel la ley del buen samaritano? ¿La responsabilidad en quién recae? Porque supongo que no se pierde el hecho de mantener la seguridad del alimento y que llegue en perfecto estado al beneficiario, a quien lo consume. ¿En dónde recae? ¿En el banco de alimentos?
All right,
you.
you each have 3 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a really good question. I think one challenge is, if I understand your question correctly, is there something that could be developed at the international level that would, that countries, would impact all of the countries? I think it would be really challenging, particularly with liability protection, because that is something that's so unique to each country. And even as we're starting to learn, countries treat the amount of liability that a company would have in the case of food very differently from one another. So even the way that Good Samaritan laws would be worded in different countries is so different. Like the US one, different from the Israeli one, different from the Italian one. So that would be challenging. I think there is a role at the international level, though, to put out potentially kind of guidance on what best practices would be, or model language that could be adopted by different countries. And there's a lot, there's a lot that could be done on that in terms of tax, in terms of liability, in terms of, date labels, and many other areas as well. So there's certainly a role for it, but I don't think that there's a mechanism that it could supersede national law.
Well done.
In my 3 minutes.
Yes.
With more.
With more.
Okay, I'll be less than 3 minutes also, don't worry. Look, from what I understand, the way the law is structured, it protects food donors all the way down the chain. As long as everyone is following best practices, is not reckless, is using what's customarily used, so cooked food, storing it in refrigerated trucks, making sure it moves along the chain properly, then everyone's protected, from the person who created the food and donated it to the food bank, to Leket itself, which we certainly want protection as well, and on to the let's say the soup kitchen, if they're the ones feeding the people. Everyone's protected along the line as long as they've done what they need to do. These laws, if I understood correctly, again from Lisa the other day, these laws have not been, in the US, have not really been challenged. So the idea of these laws is we like to keep them theoretical, okay? They're out there, but we really don't want people challenging them, because that really makes for a dangerous game for the food banks, because even if you have that protection, if there are big lawsuits because people aren't careful in some way, that's going to challenge us greatly, and all that effort may be for naught for the long term.
We have a saying among lawyers that bad facts make bad laws. So if you have an egregious situation, you don't want to be dealing with that and relying on Good Samaritan protection in that circumstance. Mr. Gilbertson, did you have a question?
Thank you. Reflecting on the answer to the question about whether it could be globalized, I can understand the answer. I wonder if anybody has looked into an approach which would not eliminate the risk, but rather mitigate the risk. For example, drawing on global reinsurance or insurance, and perhaps having local government being encouraged to pay the premiums for that insurance. And if you can't get the government to pay the premiums, then the private sector might pay the premiums as a contribution.
I appreciate, I think, again, as we're starting to look at this in other countries as well, we're seeing lots of solutions. And I think in some countries, and I want to say France, although I'm not sure, maybe it's like some European countries, the way they're mitigating risk is through indemnification, kind of contract agreements and insurance. And I think you're right that that could be just the type of incentive that government could support in terms of offsetting some of that insurance. So that might be an option. It just seems like there's a lot of different opportunity, and because this is a concern, I think in some ways it's interesting. The more countries that start passing some sort of laws around this, I think there'll be more pressure on other countries to do it as well, as companies come to see this as a standard sort of protection. So I think it will be really interesting. I mean, it's in the U.S. as well. We have this protection. We've had it for a while. It's now just over 20 years old, and there's still a lot of questions. And it's actually interesting in the U.S. Farm Bill, which is our sort of kind of package of supports for farming in the food sector that passes about every 5 years. They just now announced that the U.S. Department of Agriculture will have to put out some guidance around the liability protection, because even though it's there, there's been some questions. And so circling back to the previous question about, Joseph mentioned, drawing on Lisa, that it hasn't been challenged in court in the U.S., which is great. It also means that there's questions about how certain of the language should be interpreted. So I think there's just a lot of room for growth and learning across countries, both in the U.S. and then other places as well. And I think just so many different ways you could tackle this issue.
So thank you everybody. Nichol, Joseph, Angela, Nadia, and Emily, thank you for joining us today and being a part of this discussion. And we are now going to move on to a handful of case studies that Doug is going to walk us through. So the panel will exit.
You guys will have a break.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I am Matías Galíndez, National President of Argentina Food Banking Network. Bueno, en representación de todos los bancos de alimentos de Argentina, me gustaría contarles la historia corta de 2 o 3 años que hemos tenido hasta lograr la ley donal, como la llamamos en Argentina, que es la ley del buen samaritano. Es una historia corta donde, más allá de dar detalles de cómo fuimos llevando adelante la estrategia, lo que nos interesa es compartir los learning points, los aprendizajes que hemos tenido para tratar que el resto de los bancos, de las redes, puedan capitalizar nuestra experiencia. Esto es Argentina, rápidamente la radiografía. Hoy en día estamos ya recuperando 12.000 toneladas de alimentos anuales. Estamos prácticamente superando ya los 20 bancos, algunos en procesos de formación. Estamos con un crecimiento importante y esa fue la primera fundamento de por qué iniciamos el proceso de llevar adelante la búsqueda de la ley donal. Tenemos una estrategia de crecimiento exponencial. Queremos duplicar en muy poco tiempo los kilos que hoy en día estamos recuperando y distribuyendo, y entendemos que tener un marco legal que incentive, que promueva las donaciones es parte de los pilares de una estrategia de crecimiento. Cuando empezamos a tomar la decisión fue por el 2016 y aquí viene uno de los principales aprendizajes que hemos tenido, que tiene que ver con armar un equipo nacional. Fue un comité conformado tanto por miembros del Board Nacional como también miembros de los bancos locales. Fue una integración de trabajo que también integró a profesionales, a expertos, y esta es una de las grandes recomendaciones que hacemos, es que incluyan en sus equipos a expertos tributarios, a expertos legales, a expertos en aspectos nutricionales que puedan acompañar y fundamentar cualquier proyecto legislativo que ustedes lleven adelante. Y empezamos a conformar una estrategia, que en esa estrategia planteamos 3 pilares principales. Uno es la ley de buen samaritano, que es la limitación de la responsabilidad del donante en la medida que lo haga con buena fe. La segunda, reformas que tienen que ver con las leyes impositivas de Argentina para lograr mayor incentivos fiscales. Y la tercera, tiene que ver con una normativa que nos parece muy interesante, que tiene que ver con el doble vencimiento, con esa ventana social que podemos lograr en los alimentos y poder de alguna manera tener más tiempo para poder cumplir con nuestro propósito. Y todo esto lo fuimos llevando adelante con una oportunidad que era lograr el posicionamiento de los bancos en Argentina sobre esta temática. Pusimos este tema en el tapete, lo pusimos en la mesa de las discusiones, aprovechando la tendencia que hay de hablar sobre los desperdicios, de tener mayor conciencia sobre la situación en la que estamos, y los bancos de alimentos aprovechamos esa oportunidad. Y ahí empezamos a transitar en un camino no muy sencillo que tiene que ver con correr por los pasillos de los parlamentos para poder lograr que estas leyes se promuevan. Y ahí es otra de las grandes recomendaciones que podemos dar, que es armarse de muchísima paciencia. Y muchísima paciencia. Nosotros en la primera instancia fuimos con un solo paquete integrado de leyes. Queríamos todo de una. Lograr la ley de responsabilidad, la de los incentivos y también la del doble vencimiento. Y nos dimos cuenta que era muy ambicioso. Nuestros legisladores nos dijeron, vayan punto por punto. Entonces volvimos a trabajar y ahí empezamos a plantear únicamente la ley de responsabilidad. Y acá viene otro aprendizaje importante, que tiene que ver con que esta ley, la que se aprobó en la legislatura, no es la ley que nosotros iniciamos. Empezamos con un proyecto y lo socializamos. Ese equipo trabajó, lo compartió con los bancos de alimentos, todos tuvieron la posibilidad de opinar, de contribuir, y una vez que nosotros teníamos nuestro proyecto, fuimos al Ministerio de Agroindustria, fuimos al Ministerio de Desarrollo Social y armamos un frente común para llevar adelante ese proyecto. Otra recomendación, no se enamoren de su proyecto de ley. Compártanlo, socialícenlo y que lo presente quien quiera presentar y quien tenga el mayor poder de influencia a la hora de lograr. El objetivo es uno y hay muchas más instituciones que están buscando este objetivo. Fuimos los promotores, pero en definitiva cuando llegaron los aplausos no fuimos los que estuvimos en el escenario y no nos interesó, porque la ley hoy ya es ley y está en proceso de reglamentación. Y hoy ya estamos en camino de seguir transformando, de seguir avanzando en las otras leyes, y lo que nos queda ahora es seguir socializando los resultados hasta ahora que hemos logrado, que son muy pocos. No tenemos la posibilidad de compartir el impacto que ha tenido esto porque estamos apenas en la reglamentación, pero les aseguramos que es un camino que abre un montón de oportunidades para las redes de poder lograr un marco mucho más que incentive la donación de los alimentos en cada uno de sus países. Y una recomendación para la Global, para terminar, es que nosotros aprovechamos todo el capital intelectual que encontramos. Buscamos los marcos normativos internacionales que había hecho Francia, que había hecho Italia, que habían hecho en nuestra región. Es importante sistematizar y que todo ese trabajo que nosotros hicimos, de alguna manera, esté muchísimo más a disposición y abiertamente a todos los bancos que quieran iniciar este camino. Estamos desde Argentina a disposición para acompañarlos en este esfuerzo hermoso que es ir a buscar una reglamentación que cumpla con los derechos básicos de la alimentación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for this invitation and for this opportunity. I want to tell you about the law, the Italian law 166 that was passed in 2016. This law has a title that in English is more or less Provisions about Donation and Redistribution of Food and Pharmaceutical Products to Social Solidarity and to Limit Waste. This law was the outcome of a long and hard work between lawmakers and the world of profit and non-profit, which, with the new rules, it has been established an approach that simplifies the donations of food rather than forcing it. The main objective of this law is to prevent food waste and increase the recovery of surplus food through an integrated approach. But there are also 4 secondary objectives. The first is to clarify and harmonize other food regulations and previous laws about food donation. The second one is to create new synergies between public and private entities, especially regarding the recovery of surplus food. The third one is to stimulate innovation in efforts to prevention of food waste. And the last one is to build and promote a new culture about limiting domestic food waste. How has this been possible? The new law established a hierarchy in the use of food and clarified the connection between products and food bank organizations. The law regulates civil liability and simplifies the process of donations. The rules about food safety are now also regulated. At long last, Law 166 provides the opportunity for the donors to avoid VAT perception and grants them a small deduction in waste tax. The synergies were provided with the creation of a round table coordinated by the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry Policy. This round table comprises all the stakeholders of food supply chain, the charitable organizations, and public administrations involved. The aim is to implement a food and waste surplus database in order to address the problems regarding the process of donations. The object of stimulating innovation in the prevention of food waste is achieved through a new observatory on surplus food, food recovery, and then food waste. Moreover, the law sets to finance innovation projects in food waste. The promotion of a new culture to limit domestic waste will be pursued through educational campaigns in schools and for customers against food waste. Citizens will be informed through special media campaigns realized by Italian national television. The law was approved 2 years ago, but we are already seeing 2 great results. From the roundtable for the fight against waste food, we have 2 results. The first is the effort to study a regulated pathway to finance the transformation cost for charitable organizations in order to avoid the waste of fruit at peak production. The second one is the alignment of the previous tax legislation with the new law. Also, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry Policy has set to create a national study center on surplus food recovery and waste, and will implement a call of proposal for innovation projects in the field of food waste. But personally, I think that the best result is that the Science 2016, thanks to these new rules, the Italian Food Bank has seen a 20% increase of surplus food recovery from the distribution sector. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ana Isabel Mendez. I'm General Manager of Banco Alimentos Panamá. I'm going to speak in Spanish. It's easier for me, so please. Okay. I'm going to put you very quickly in the context of the situation in Panama. The bank has only 4 years of being created. In Panama, I'm going to switch now. I forgot. Panamá es un país de aproximadamente 4 millones de personas, de las cuales un 10%, 400.000 personas, sufren de inseguridad alimentaria. Adicional a eso, se desperdicia el doble de los alimentos que se necesitarían para alimentar a todas esas 400.000 personas. Creo que es algo que ya hemos escuchado a nivel mundial. Bueno, Panamá no se escapa de esa situación. Es por eso que en el 2014 un grupo de empresas buscando pues, ayudar a esa solución ven la idea de crear un banco de alimentos que no existía en todo Centroamérica, increíblemente existía en todo Centroamérica, salvo Panamá y otros 2 países. Junto a la Red Mundial de Bancos de Alimentos, GFN, y otros bancos de la región logramos pues, implementar lo que es el banco. Sin embargo, los pasos al inicio fueron bastante difíciles. Nos dimos cuenta enseguida que existían grandes obstáculos. Uno de ellos era la falta de conciencia que existía sobre la problemática del hambre y sobre el desperdicio a nivel de los donantes. Igualmente, esa desconfianza de que no querían donar los productos por temor a que fueran, pues, ser responsables de cualquier situación que se dé con las donaciones, ya sea civil o penalmente. Así que enseguida nos dimos cuenta de que era necesario conseguir un marco legal donde pudiéramos no solo regular las operaciones del banco, sino además devolver esa confianza al donante para que quisieran donarle al banco de alimentos y además crear incentivos concretos donde ellos sintieran que el beneficio de donarle al banco era mayor que lo que estaban acostumbrados a hacer, que era ya sea descartar los alimentos o venderlos a sus empleados a un precio descontado. ¿Qué hacemos en ese momento? Pues buscamos alguna manera de crear y levantar de cero una ley que pueda pues, incentivar y proteger a los donantes. Un grupo de abogados que dona su tiempo de manera gratuita se basa pues, en una ley, la ley de Argentina, que es la 25.989 del 2004, que se tomó como base por ser una ley bastante clara y sencilla. Se levanta entonces esa ley, donde un borrador donde básicamente lo que se ponía era que todas las donaciones que las empresas dieran a través del Banco de Alimentos los liberaba de responsabilidad civil y penal a ellos y al Banco de Alimentos siempre que fueran entregadas en buena fe. Igualmente se crearon incentivos donde las empresas que donaran alimentos al banco podían deducir del impuesto sobre la renta, recibían un certificado de donación, donde podían deducir el 100% de lo donado. Normalmente para las empresas en Panamá las donaciones pueden ser el 1% de lo que donan. Sin embargo, si donan sus alimentos al Banco de Alimentos, lo pueden deducir el 100%. O sea que eso fue un incentivo bastante atractivo que se logró para que ellos de esa manera pues se dan cuenta que era mucho más beneficioso entregar los alimentos al banco que descartarlos o simplemente seguirlos vendiendo a sus empleados. ¿Cómo hicimos para pasar esta ley? Como dije, el banco tiene 4 años, empezó en octubre, la ley se aprobó en diciembre del 2014, es decir, en 2 meses. Lo que hicimos fue, básicamente, buscar a nuestros socios fundadores, que eran 15 empresas muy reconocidas en el país, que tenían muchos contactos, que siempre nos respaldaron desde el día 1, y con un proyecto que aún estaba en un PowerPoint o en papeles, fuimos a buscar el apoyo de otros sectores. Conseguimos el apoyo de la Iglesia Católica, que en Panamá es un ente que tiene mucho peso frente al gobierno, a iniciativas con el gobierno, y de la mano con ellos fuimos a la Asamblea de Diputados. ¿Qué pasaba? Era un momento político en Panamá donde acababa de entrar la Asamblea Legislativa, un nuevo gobierno, por lo que todavía la Asamblea no estaba dispersa ni tenía ningún tipo de discusiones o de separación. Y había un diputado nuevo independiente que acababa de entrar y era su primera vez en la asamblea. Se le presentó el proyecto y se logró que lo acogiera. Una vez que lo acogió y pues se enamoró del proyecto, se tomó la labor de convencer a un grupo de diputados de otros partidos políticos a que también lo tomaran. Esto duró prácticamente 2 meses en que se aprobara la ley. Una vez que la ley se aprobó y se divulgó a los donantes, las donaciones comenzaron a fluir, lo cual en 4 años hemos logrado ya distribuir alrededor de 4.000 toneladas de alimentos que han venido a partir de pues, esta ley que tenemos desde el día 1 que comenzó el banco. Para concluir, ¿cuál es mi recomendación? Es buscar el apoyo de los sectores fuertes que puedan llevarnos a que alguien acoja el proyecto que le guste y que además logremos convencerlo de que estas acciones público-privadas que son para el bien son buenas y debemos perseguirlas. Gracias.
Good afternoon. I am Ilian Yordanov, and I come from Bulgaria, from the Bulgarian Food Bank. Bulgarian Food Bank came into existence in 2012. It was created by a number of food industry companies, one of them being Mondelez, the former Kraft. At that time, all the donations in my country were not tax exempt, VAT exempt included. And it was, at that time, and it's still cheaper to destroy food than to donate. Our board decided immediately, with the creation of the food bank, to start working with the Ministry of Finance and change the law on VAT. In order to give opportunity to food donors to be tax exempt. From 2012 to 2014, intensive exchange of letters followed with no result on VAT regulations. But the Bulgarian Food Bank was invited to join a working group within the Ministry of Food and Agriculture and to start working on the new law on food, where it regulated all the food banking activities. Once the food banking and the food banks started to exist in the legal world, we proceeded further in being supported by one of our biggest supporters and financial donors. We've been introduced to 2 members of parliament who took the initiative to pass the law on VAT. And the law on VAT passed the parliament in November 2016. It took 4 years. Finally, in addition to the change of VAT regulation and regulation of food banking operation in the country, we've been invited as a permanent member to a working group within the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agriculture, to develop the national policy on food waste. The results achieved till now the results are not dramatically changing the environment, because on the way the Ministry of Food and Agriculture imposed a regulation on food labeling in order to be VAT exempt. All the donations should be labeled donation or for sale. In a way, this blocked the whole initial intention. We began to work on it 2 years ago, and we hope that this year, by the end of this year, this regulation will be changed. So the full impact of the changes in the food law and the changes in the VAT law will be seen. Of course, we didn't do this alone. We've been heavily helped by FEBA, by GFN, by the Alliance and by the Alliance to End Hunger. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug O'Brien, Vice President of Programs at GFN, and we have a very special announcement to make to everyone here and to the network as a whole about an exciting new project. I believe some paper is being passed out now. GFN has heard about the challenges that you all face in trying to secure more food when government policy sometimes inadvertently works against that. Your work is an important complement to the social safety net in many countries, or as Ms. Goodwin noted, is that in some countries it's actually a fundamental part of the overall social safety net. So we've reached out to the Walmart Foundation, who has graciously offered to support this project and launch it. It is a groundbreaking research project that will have a direct and effective impact on your work in your countries. And to talk about it more, I want to introduce Professor Leib from Harvard's Law School's Food Policy and Law Clinic.
Hello again. Thank you so much, Doug. And I am really excited to be here, to be here in person and be able to announce this project. I want to echo Doug also in thanking the Walmart Foundation. We're so grateful for this. And this really comes from a lot of the themes that we heard in these last few panels. So the idea of this project is the Food Law and Policy Clinic partnering with the Global Food Banking Network, and then even more so partnering with the food bank networks on the ground in countries around the globe to really do a comparative analysis and understand some of these legal issues that we talked about in these policies. So we'll be working with food banks, with other partners like academia, other NGOs, businesses, and government, and we'll be cataloging over the next 2 years policies in 15 countries. We're going to start with countries in North America and Latin America, and you can see on there are the first countries that we identified with GFN really telling us where this could be helpful, where there's a lot of activity going on and there might be questions. So we'll be starting with the US, which we know well, but trying to kind of, see how it compares to other countries and is similar and different. Then Argentina, Mexico, Chile, and Canada. And I'll say as well, we've only so far had a conversation with Argentina. The first step is really talking with the food bank networks in those countries and making sure that this will be useful and that the partnership is wanted. And then in the second year, we do not yet have the list of countries finalized, but we'll be expanding to other parts of the globe, in Europe, in Africa, and Asia. And again, we're only doing 15 countries. There are so many more that are represented here and in the GFN network. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to others after this, but for now, we'll be looking at those countries. We'll be cataloging kind of a comparative analysis of different areas of law. So liability, both what the liability is if someone were to get sick, and then whether there's protection, how the tax scheme plays into donations, labeling, food safety, and then really what, other questions, other issues and barriers that are going to be country by country. So there might be a barrier in one country and the solution there is some, governmental awareness raising, or it might be that there's funding needed for certain things, and that's going to really vary. So we'll be comparing those. We'll have a website where you can visit and learn about some of these comparisons between those countries, and there'll be an opportunity there as well to share resources from other countries that even if we haven't included them in this initial phase, you'll be able to use that as a hub for some of that information. There'll be a policy guide for each country that we're working in that really explains what the laws are on these issues, and then some individual country kind of best practices and recommendations that, again, really come from those countries. I think what's interesting and exciting to me is to learn how countries are doing this differently. We even heard today how much innovation and creativity there is in handling these issues in really different ways. So what can we learn from one another? What can we learn in the U.S. as well about ways to do this? And what can different countries learn within their regions and from other regions? And then what are some of the specific barriers, and how can we help in those countries to raise the profile of this issue and have some dialogues about those? So I think I've covered the main points. I think there's an opportunity. People have questions about the project. I'll also be here the next few days. I'm just really grateful and excited. And I want to also give a shout out to Brian, who's my colleague in the back corner. Brian, if you can wave, please. So if you can't find me, but you have questions as well after right now, you can talk to either one of us. So yeah. And thank you to, again, Walmart Foundation and GFN for partnering with us.
Thanks, Emily. So just going to close out with a bit of logistics for the evening. So the easy part is tomorrow morning, back in here at 9 o'clock. So you get a relative lie-in tomorrow. Right, the more complicated part is this evening and the House of Commons reception. So first thing to say is please gather in the lobby 5:45 to start boarding the buses. Okay? So a reminder, you must have photo ID. You must have your printed invitation. Having it on your phone is no good. You must have the hard copy. It was in your bag when you registered. Please also bring your name badge for this event. And please don't bring too much else beside that. Okay. Try not to bring large laptop bags and those kind of things. There is full airport-style security to get into the House of Commons, as you can probably imagine. So please try not to bring laptops and other big bags. A handbag or something is fine. Just an idea with the airport security as well. You do have to wait outside, not undercover, for what could be, particularly this evening, quite a long time for us all to get through security. So if you need a coat, hat, gloves, whatever you need, be prepared to be standing outside for 45 minutes to get through security.